Let's talk college basketball. Number 2 ranked Pitt Hoops won't be ranked number 2 for much longer. They suffered a loss to number 14th ranked Notre Dame Monday night. It was a low-scoring game, 56 to 51. The loss dropped their record to 19 and 2, 7 and 1 in the conference, but they still maintained the lead in the Big East. Providence and Syracuse both lost the last couple nights, widening their lead in the Big East standings. What can you tell us about the loss on Monday, and do you think Pitt will retain its lead in the Big East?
Well, they didn't exactly shoot well from the floor. They only shot 40% here looking at the box score. But at Ben's Hansbrough for Notre Dame really just tormented the Pitt Panthers all night. But Notre Dame played a great game. They slowed the offense down, turned to a very low-scoring game. I mean, Pitt scoring only 51. That's 10 less than their previous low for the year. So that's something they're going to have to look at. But the one thing I always love about watching a Pitt basketball game is how well they share the basketball. They are number one in the NCAA in assists per game. So I think that, and as well as their great rebounding, is a reason why I think they could potentially do well. Now, you always have the issue of the Big East tournament being problematic, but who knows? We'll see what happens. I mean, I don't know. What do you think? Do you think they can make a Final Four this year?
Well, I mean, I think they definitely can make the Final Four. Jamie Dixon's team seems to struggle in the March Madness tournament for some reason. They have losses to Kent State, Marquette, Bradley, Xavier over the years in the March Madness tournament. Teams they really shouldn't have lost to. I still think they're better than all those teams they play, so it becomes an issue. Is it Jamie Dixon's fault they lose their games, or some people say the style of play doesn't work in the March Madness tournaments, the referees aren't as aren't as loose, they're more strict. So I mean, there's a combination of factors I think, but Jamie Dixon, if it'd be good for him to finally get this monkey off his back. I mean, in my eyes, there's no reason why they should not be able to make the Final Four this year. They have a talented, deep team. Um, they're ranked number 2 for a reason. Of course, they won't be ranked much longer number 2. But, you keep thinking if they keep knocking on the door, eventually they're going to knock the door down and they're going to get there. I would just be happy if they at least made the Final Four. If they don't win it, I won't be extremely disappointed. I would just like them to take that next step and make it. I mean, West Virginia, Butler, George Mason, all those teams make it, but for some reason a very talented Pitt squad seems to have trouble in March. So I don't know what's going to happen this year. I'm afraid to get my hopes up, me being a Pitt fan and everything. But I guess I will say this will be the year they get to the Final Four, although I will not be shocked at all. I will not be shocked at all if they lose in the second round, because I'm so used to it. So we'll see what
Looking
happens
through
there.
looking through the rest of their regular schedule, I mean, home and homes versus currently number 7 Villanova, home and home versus West Virginia, which you're always going to have hard-fought battles there. I mean, their regular season doesn't look too bad. It's about what they can do in the tournament. Now, they did have a couple of big-name games early on in the year, non-conference wise, particularly Texas and Tennessee. Do you think games like that in these early tournaments, do you think that makes any difference when it comes down to March Madness?
Well, it can help, but I don't think it's going to help much. That was at the beginning of the year. If they were playing non-conference foes more towards the end of the year, like some teams do, I think it could give them a better feel what to expect. I mean, let's be honest, the teams they play in the March Madness tournament are teams that have been matchup problems for Pitt. Fast, speedy guards. So I don't see it being much of a factor, only because it was so long ago. I mean, they've beaten out of conference opponents before that were ranked and nothing's happened. So I do think if anything's going to help, I think it's just going to be I think it's going to be coaching. I think this is Dixon's priority now. So I mean, they can't play the same way through the March Madness tournament and expect to get there. They're grinded out type of style of play. They kind of build up on a lead. They try build up on a lead, grind it out towards the end, make sure they find a way to squeeze out the win at the end. So I don't think that's gonna I think they're gonna have to change that. I mean, Pitt they can be a fast break team. They can score monster points. They can jump, but it doesn't happen much. I think in the tournament they're gonna need to find a way to get that Pitt team to play. the better part of their game. So I think they are just going to have to change style of play. I mean, playing out of conference foes can help, but when it's so early in the season, I don't see it being much of a factor now.
Well, you, you mentioned it earlier with regards to the referees. The Big East referees in particular, they will let a lot go. You won't see a lot of hand checks. But then you come down to the tournament and you got referees from the Big Sky doing a Big East versus Big Ten game, and you wonder why both teams' starting lineups have fouled out of the game. So, I mean, it's a little sad that we have to have this big of a discrepancy between conference referees, but I think that definitely plays to the disadvantage of a physical team like Pitt. What do you think there?
I agree. I mean, I think that is a big factor. Referees are different. Like you said, some referees will be more strict, some will be loose. Big East refs typically are loose because they know they're physical teams. They know the Big East is physical. So when you get referees from other conferences, ACC, SEC, it really doesn't matter, that are completely different, it is going to throw Pitt's game off. I know people say, oh, you can't blame the referees. You should find a way to win. Well, I mean, yeah, but realistically, you have to realize referees will play a big factor in this. So they can change an entire game around. I mean, Pitt could come out strong, come out tough and physical, and all of a sudden, Gary McGee can have 2 fouls already, 3 fouls before the second half starts, and that changes a lot. So I don't want to hear people say it doesn't have anything to do with it, because it does have something to do with it. Maybe not everything, but it does have a big amount to do with it, in my opinion.
So how can you adjust to something like that? I mean, what can you say what can you do as Jamie Dixon to try to make it so that McGee doesn't get 3 fouls in the first 2 minutes?
I think, not just for Pitt, every team in the tournament should be aware of what kind of referees they're going to have in each game. So if Pitt's playing an ACC team, maybe with an ACC ref, they should know about it. The players should know about it. I think the referees and the coaches should come together. Let the coaches know what kind of game they should expect from the referees. Let the referees know what kind of teams they have, what they're used to. I mean, I kind of get the impression that referees are just thrown out there, and wherever they land, that's where they land, and nothing really happens. I think these referees should be informed, and so should the coaches, of what should they expect. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, a referee can change the whole pace of a game around. Don't say they can. A lot of people say they cannot. They can. I know I'm not the kind of guy. I'm not one of those guys that say, "Oh, it's the referee's fault. They lost the game. It's entirely their fault." Well, I'm not saying it's entirely their fault. I am saying though it is partially their fault. So I won't even say fault. It's partially the reason. So a Big East team like Pitt, if they get a horrible matchup, against, let's say, a speedy team, they don't have to be ranked. I mean, it could be horrible for them. So let's say they play someone, I don't know, like they could play a crap team like George Mason for all I care. And George Mason, considering what type of their style of play they have, it can be a bad matchup problem with Pitt plus the referees, and they don't even know about it. So I mean, we'll see what happens there, but
Yeah, and I don't know how exactly the referee system works. If they find out the day of the game, if they find out a couple days ahead of time, and then if so, I mean, what do you do for the second round game? You're preparing all this time for the first round, but then if you go from having real strict, Pacific Sky Conference referees, then going to having a real loose let them play type of referee in the Big East or Big Ten in round two. I mean, how can you adjust from one game to the other in just 48 hours to be able to figure that out? I mean, it can completely change a game plan because a physical team like Pitt is not going to be able to play their game when they're playing with refs who will call a hand check every time, and then be able to try to adjust when they're used to playing where you could literally go and plow somebody like you're a fullback running up the middle and probably not get a foul called. It's two different styles of play and almost two different games of basketball, and it makes it real tough for schools to be able to figure out what is to be expected of them.
exactly. Now, I mean, all the stuff we just suggested could be easier said than done. I understand that. But I mean, I don't know what happens prior to the games. I don't know if maybe they are informed. I don't know. Something
That's
needs to be
yeah.
done, you know?
Well, and that's a lot easier. I mean, if you can't do that, the only other option I see is trying to be able to find some middle ground between all the conferences and the NCAA to try to get some sort of consistency. And I think that's less likely. So I think you're right. I think you got to be able to tell the teams ahead of time, hey, look, you're getting some referees. Their track record is they call the second most penalties in the league, so that both teams, coaches, and fans all aren't questioning why all of a sudden both teams' entire starting lineups have fouled out of the game.
Yeah, I mean, the more I think about it, the more I think I start to realize that it's not necessarily Jamie Dixon's fault that he can't win big in March. I mean, he's done great things with the teams throughout the regular season. Now you're telling me that those great pit teams cannot get it done in the tournament when they lose to teams like a Bradley or an Xavier in the tournament like that. So maybe it's not his fault. Maybe he just can't help it. Maybe he
Yeah,
cannot adjust his team. I think it might be beyond his control, and it might not just be for Jamie Dixon. It might be for any coach in the country.
yeah.
I mean,
Well,
you
and
wonder
what
why there's so
yeah.
many upsets, you know?
Yeah, well, and what happens when you have, like a couple of years ago, when you had Villanova playing Pitt in the Elite Eight? Do they bring in a Big East ref, or could they possibly be getting a Pac-10 referee who will call completely different and not know what either of these teams are like? I mean, it's stuff like that that yeah, I think the NCAA tournament really they ought to be looking at stuff like that because that's a big part of the game, whether people want to talk about it or not, because you need to know what you're going to be expecting. And when you're used to one thing all year and then having to change it all of a sudden,
Yeah.
it makes things difficult.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying a Big East team should definitely get a Big East referee because it could be unfair if they're playing an SEC team. I'm just saying both teams and coaches should be aware of what kind of game is going to be called. I think it'll help a lot. I think um, I think if that happens, we can. I don't think there'll be as many upsets though. Now, some people will say, "Well, that's what March Madness is all about." Well, yeah, it's fun, it's exciting, but I'd rather see see the better teams win, even if it's at the cost of an upset. But I mean, that's just my opinion. So
Yeah, I think you're right, and there may be fewer upsets that way, but it's still you're still going to get upsets, and that's still what it's about. And I mean, last couple of years there may have even been too many upsets. Some people would say so.
yeah, I
So who
mean,
knows?
we can't say for sure those are the referees. I mean, if George Mason or West Virginia won 6 games in a row, I mean, I can say that's probably not the referee's reason.
Yeah, but
Referees doing.
yeah, Butler making it all the way to the finals last year. I mean, that's not referees doing. But yeah, if a number 15 seed goes and upsets teams every time, that's another story.
Yeah, the problem becomes is when half your team is almost fouled out and it's not even the second half yet. So I mean, that's the issue I have. Then it changes the game. So
So it makes it interesting. Well, let's
definitely makes it
yeah.
interesting. So I mean,
Well,
see what
yeah.
happens, I guess there.